Ma'am,
Hi, am I audible?
yes, you are. Please go ahead.
Okay, okay. Should I go ahead now? Right. So thank you so much. And I hope you can all hear me. I'm sorry I couldn't join in person. Um, it's a bit of a busy time, but my congratulations to all of you, especially to Adhyayan Foundation, to Librarians of India, to Bachpan Manao, and uh, the H.T. Parekh Foundation for organizing this convening called the Shared Shelf, a convening on diversity, equity, and inclusion in libraries. Um, I'm really happy to be addressing this group. I understand there are librarians, there are teachers, educators, and activists over here. Those who are concerned about how we can make libraries more inclusive to everybody, more diverse, more equitable. I think that's a very good place to start from because public libraries, by definition, I believe, should be inclusive in every way, inclusive with starting with a view that inclusive means not just people like us, but everyone, regardless of age, gender, disability, class, etc. Public libraries should not only be open to all, but should also make efforts to see, not in a passive way, but also in active, proactive ways, to make efforts to see who might be excluded and reach out specifically to these groups. To give you an example, when we started the rejuvenation and revitalization of Karnataka's rural libraries in 2020, November, we started with a view that rural children needed something to stay connected with learning. That was a time when schools and colleges were closed because of COVID. And while urban children had some access to devices, rural children found it very difficult. And therefore, our primary motivation was to provide a space where rural children could stay connected to reading, stay connected to learning, maybe use shared devices, and so on. So the very starting point of the revitalization of libraries for everyone actually started with a view to make it more accessible for rural children who were otherwise disconnected with reading. Uh, but I think there are many other ways in which libraries can reach out to different groups, and I think we should go with that fundamental principle that we want to be open to everybody, regardless of their identity or age or gender or class. Um, we should thereafter, building on that principle, take a very focused problem solving approach. For example, disability. There are different kinds of disabilities. There are locomotor disabilities, there's visual impairment, there's hearing impairment, there are intellectual disabilities, autism, and different kinds of disabilities which have different needs. And therefore, for example, Karnataka's rural libraries, rural public libraries, now have assistive learning devices for users with visual impairment. These all have been ordered by design from the National Institute of Visually Handicap, National Institute for the Visually Handicapped, NIVH, and there are 8 devices which include tactile abacus, tactile snakes and ladders, different kinds of devices, including a ball which makes a sound. devices that were actually not just chosen by us, but chosen by us in consultation with persons with disability, because we follow the principle that nothing um, for those with disabilities without first consulting those with disabilities to understand what are the best ways in which we can make the library space more accessible for them. So we even had 100% blind panchayat development officer who helped us to choose the devices, to do the trainings. We have added Alexa digital voice assistants in many of the libraries, in several hundred libraries. And what we found, surprisingly and very heartwarmingly, was that where we are bringing in these inclusive devices, one of the learnings, which was an unexpected benefit, was that it's not just being used by those who have visual impairment, but also being used by those who are sighted, which means that in effect we are blurring the boundaries of interaction between and promoting interaction between, especially between children, but also between adults and intergenerational kind of interactions between those who are sighted and those who have visual impairment, which is, it was astounding and very exciting to see that. Similarly, digital voice assistants, while we place them for the use of children who were blind or who have visual impairment, we also find that sighted children are using them along with their friends who have visual impairment in order to practice singing songs or uh, 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 asking questions, improving their vocabulary, improving their pronunciation, and generally using them for enriched learning activities. Digital voice assistants I've spoken about. There are other features that we can bring in into libraries in order to make them more accessible to those users with disabilities and reduced mobility. For example, ramps and railings help not only those with locomotor disabilities, but also the elderly or the pregnant women, those who require a little assistance, who have temporary or permanent reduced mobility, to access the library. Magnifying lenses, a very small, very cheap device, which helps the elderly to access library services and especially to read the newspapers. Even children from low income families where parents have difficulty accessing membership based Sorry, I got disconnected. Am I audible? Right. So I was saying about this librarian from Dakshin Kannada, Savitri, who came up with this wonderful idea. We were talking about just before my session at the Indian Library Congress in Kannur some years ago. We were just talking, sitting together, waiting for the session to start, and I was chatting with them that we need to find ways to make the library more accessible to those users with disabilities. So Savitri immediately went back to her library, and there are This is a region where there are a lot of endosulfan victims who have serious disabilities caused by endosulfan. She went house to house and invited the parents along with their children, some of whom are of adult age, to come to the library. She arranged smiley balls and invited the parents who are the caregivers to come with the endosulfan victims to the library in order to spend some time. So this was a very extraordinary and sophisticated and very advanced understanding of inclusion, I felt, of the library as a space which can also provide respite care to caregivers, provide some socialization to those with severe disabilities. Um, um, the idea of a smiley ball, putting it in their hands, even if somebody is coming to the library to sit for a while, perhaps not to read, but just to experience the wholesomeness of sitting in a space with other individuals in a wholesome and welcoming environment. I think the library should play that role as well. And that's something I learned from one of our librarians. Another important advanced idea which came from one of the librarians was also about Ammanigagi Pustaka, which means literally a book for my mother. Uh, Children in this library were a mix of those who had parents who were semi-literate or illiterate, as well as some whose parents had some education. And so, to blur the boundaries, what this librarian did was to encourage children to take a book home to read to their mothers or read with their mothers. So, those whose mothers could read would read to the child, and those whose mothers could not read fluently or could not read at all, in that case the child would read to the mother. So the idea being that the experience of learning and reading with a parent, reading together with a parent, can be extended uh, uh, regardless of whether the parent is reading to the child or the child is reading to the parent. And I think that blurs the boundaries between the children from semi-literate families and children from more educated families as well. So these are very small but significant ways in which librarians themselves have understood the ways in which they can perform outreach and they can bring in different groups of users to the library, including those who have always been hesitant to visit a space which is full of books and where there are more privileged people and so on. We should encourage these kinds of initiatives, and we should really, design the library as a space that welcomes diversity, welcomes interaction. For example, when we thought of putting chessboards in the libraries, the panchayat members didn't bat an eyelid. They didn't say the library is supposed to be a silent space. There isn't this middle class understanding of a library as just a place where you go in, you read for some time quietly, you borrow two books, and you return two books. That's not what a library is. A library is a community space where some reading can happen silently, some reading can happen aloud. Read alouds. Adhyayan has worked on this, and it's now there across the state. Read alouds happen regularly in the libraries, but also just a space for interaction, for a game of chess, for a game of carom, maybe for a YouTube session, a weekly YouTube session, maybe for a read aloud, which is online, maybe a place to watch the election results on TV, maybe just a place to come and sit quietly, maybe a space where Asha workers can come and write their registers. The library has to perform, and of course, a space where students have to study and prepare for competitive exams, not to deny the very important and urgent need for spaces, academic spaces, quiet spaces where young boys and girls can study for exams. The library has to perform all these different roles and can perform all these different roles. Increasingly in Karnataka, we are seeing that panchayats and communities are coming forward to add additional spaces and additional rooms to their libraries in order to make all these different activities possible. Now, with the exams coming up, the 10th board exams coming up, libraries are staying open for longer hours, allowing students to access them. I should tell you about a library in Yadgir or Gulbarga, I think, when I went late at night, around 8 o'clock at night. I was planning to uh, go a little further, but then I saw this little, um, in the midst of all the darkness, there was one building which was blazing with light. Um, and when I stepped inside, I found that this was this little library with 7,400 books and for computers, students studying, and students were going to study late into the night. Sometimes libraries actually just perform inclusion by staying open for longer than they usually do, allowing one of the users, a responsible user, to hold the keys while the librarian goes home, so that group study, quiet study can happen. Some of these young people don't have space to study at home, may not have the lights, all of these things. So I think there are ways in which the library uh, can open its services to everybody. I still remember one of the first barriers that we removed was that small refundable deposit, which is charged for young children to become members of the library. In 2020 itself, we removed that barrier and said that the Gram Panchayats will pay that refundable deposit. Removing that barrier has now ensured that more than 50 lakh children are enrolled as members in the Karnataka rural libraries. This, I think, this has happened over 5 years, and I think that's a tremendous uh, achievement of rural local bodies. It's a tremendous achievement of children that they have been able to come forward. I remember that in the midst of the COVID pandemic, there was a girl from Raichur who said that this is so wonderful that there are these picture books in the libraries, but we're not able to come walking to the panchayat headquarters. Is it possible for you to keep 100 books in our village so that we can read them? Otherwise, our parents don't allow us to go all the way till the library, but they tell us to study in the village or to do some other work in the fields and so on. I was happy that 3 years later we were able to get a grant in order to set up 6,600 village libraries. So the idea of access going as close to people as possible, so that they only have to walk a kilometer or 2 kilometers, and they find the space, a quiet space, where there are tables and chairs. Again, the role of furniture in performing inclusion, the role of furniture that is welcoming, that is child friendly, that is that is plain vanilla, but clean and wholesome. Tables, chairs. Sometimes panchayats have even added child sized sofas. They have added indoor plants. They have added colorful curtains. They've added murals on the walls and pictures of Gyanpith Award winners. All of these are the ways in which we make a space, a very a warm and welcoming, literacy rich academic environment, asking children I'm so sorry. I don't know why this keeps happening, but I'll wind up soon so that it doesn't happen again. Um, I assume I'm audible. Uh, so whether it's the best drawing or the best reflection or the best essay or not, because we have our own subjective views of what's good and what's not. I think all all different
Ma'am, if you could switch off your video, it might conserve bandwidth. Ma'am, perhaps you could keep your video off. That might help.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. Yeah, I've joined on my phone, so hopefully this will work. Um, uh, yeah, so as I was saying, accessibility, ramps, railings, irrespective of whether there are users who are going to bring a wheelchair or who have reduced mobility, uh, ramps, railings play an important signaling role. But additionally, libraries should do systematic outreach to reduce and eliminate barriers. Um, Barriers of gender. What we started with was a special hour for women. Mahila Samakhya went and gave us a report and said that it's a good idea to have a special women's hour. So we started with that in order to increase women's usage of the libraries. But we found that within a few months, women were coming additionally, even other than the women's hour. And so the introduction of a special focused time for different groups helps to actually reduce that sense of hesitation and apprehension, which might otherwise be there. Barriers of age. We welcome the elderly to come into the libraries. We also welcome the very young. We have started putting in many of the libraries an early childhood corner. And certainly for the elderly in Chamarajnagar, in Koppal, Yadgir, and Gulbarga, we've started elderly hour in the mornings, 3 times a week, in partnership with NGOs, where the elderly come for an active aging session. They do simple activities with smiley balls and a little bit of reading, little bit of talking, a little bit of engagement, which keeps them very warm and happy, and also makes the library a more welcoming space for them. Barriers of class. This, I think, class and caste are going to be the hardest ones, and we need to keep working on these. We need to find. I was very happy to see in one library in Kodagu, which is on the border of the forest, when I visited, there were two children, one wearing very smart clothes, who's a boy from a minority community going to a private school, and the other one was a tribal child going to a government school and wearing a government school uniform. But both of them apparently are the chess champions and come to play in chess in the library every evening. That felt really good, because that's again blurring boundaries between private school kids and government school kids, and all sorts of other boundaries between communities, and so on, which you might perhaps not see so frequently even in a city like Bangalore. Uh, I've already spoken about breaking boundaries on disability. There are devices that can be used by those with different kinds of impairment, magnifying lenses. There are devices that can help. YouTube with captions helps those with hearing impairment. There are wearable devices which can be used by those who have, their arms who have lost their arm, they can wear a device on their forehead and use it to control the computer. So I think some of these play a very valuable role, not only for signaling, but also for enabling uh, local users. And incrementally, libraries should actually find ways to use these devices, bring in these devices, and use them in order to increase access. We also have, we started with Braille books, but we found that Braille is something where many of the children with blindness don't have access to Braille tutors, so they're not able to read the Braille books. And so what we did next was came across a reader, a USB device, which is a reader called a keyboard reader, which scans the text and reads aloud and can also translate. So these are incrementally different kinds of assistive devices which can help children with different kinds of disability. I also think that the library should play the role of facilitating meeting spaces. At times, there should be, in a library which has 4 rooms, one room can easily be given to self help group women who often don't have a space of their own or a room of their own, as Virginia Woolf said, and often are forced to meet in people's houses. When they meet in people's houses, members' houses, there'll always be the spouse or the children who ask for a cup of tea or who'll ask for snacks or who'll disturb the meeting and won't allow the meeting to really focus on issues in a more professional way. And therefore, the library can play this role and should facilitate meetings for self help group women to meet. Uh, the final thing I'd like to say is that while we're training librarians to facilitate inclusion, I think we should also tell them to distinguish between what is in your face and what is performative. Merely performative ways of working at inclusion are are very facile, and I would caution against that, because I think it was Emily Dickinson who said, "Tell all the truth, but tell it slant." You can do much more without being performative. And therefore, it's important to train librarians to actually do the work rather than just talk about doing it. And that's what we try to do in Karnataka's libraries. I will stop here. I really think it's an important conversation, and I apologize once again for not having been able to come today to attend the session along with all of you. I would have really loved to hear the panel discussion and interact with all of you, but it's as I said, a busy time. It's been a pleasure. My congratulations to all of you, especially Neeta, Varsha, all of those who have organized this valuable session, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Really means a lot to us that you were here. We'll come and meet you in person to thank you as well.
Certainly. Thank you. Thank you.